I know you probably knew this before the tweet was sent out that the Chiefs game against the Pittsburgh Steelers has been moved to the other side of Cowboys versus Packers. I guess here's the only question, Jason. Like, if they have an ice storm and there's ice on the roads, how is it that much better later at night, right?
Yeah, I guess from what I've heard, this is a situation where they think the heavy stuff is going to be coming, I guess, the overnight Saturday into Sunday, and then through the early portion of the day Sunday. And their best estimation, and in talking to the local authorities there, the best way to handle this would be to hope that that's dissipated by the time or shortly after kickoff would have been, and then allow yourself a few hours to salt the roads, do whatever you're doing around the stadium complex there in Kansas City to try to make it as safe as possible for people to get there. So this is sort of their best guess at how that storm's going to unfold and what's going to be the hopefully safest means to play this game and still give people, a legitimate chance to be there as spectators and not have to risk life and limb to get there.
Yeah, the other thing is, and anybody who's lived in the Midwest, or especially once you get more to the Southwest, there's a little bit more ice storms. Having lived in Oklahoma, the ice storm is going to go through there before it gets, or as it gets to Kansas City. I think it's going to be a little worse. Will the power be on, not just for the stadium, but for people who want to watch the game? It's like, oh, sweet, I get to watch the. Hey, come on, somebody call the power. I'm fascinated by that, but maybe it gives them more time to work out those kinks.
Yeah, and I'd be a little more worried about my furnace in that situation than anything else. I hope there's a lot of people who have a lot of fireplaces around there, if nothing else, if that's the case. But, yeah, I mean, this sounds like a pretty horrendous storm. I've reached out to the Steelers. I haven't heard back immediately as to whether their travel changes, their travel plans are changing, if they're bumping flights up at all or leaving a little earlier than they might otherwise. But they were consulted before the league finalized this decision as well.
Joey Porter's going to be back with the team. Is that a good idea?
I guess it is, as long as he doesn't get in a fight with an opposing linebacker of the Chiefs or anything. He obviously had some incidents with, Burfict and Adam Jones, and I still don't know what the heck Joey Porter was doing 20 yards out on the field at that playoff game in Cincinnati last year. He's certainly a high-strung guy. He was sort of a character and a big-time trash talker and a very much an in-your-face, had that sort of persona when he played the game at a very high level, and that still is a big part of him as well now that he's a coach, for better or for worse, and obviously he's gotten him in trouble in a couple of instances here. But once the Steelers kind of did their due diligence on this situation that happened in the bar early in the week, and once the nature of those charges were dropped to, basically a couple of little misdemeanor things here, they decided that they'd take their cues from that and invite him back into the fold. I would have to think, logic would dictate that if anyone was going to be on their best behavior on the sidelines at Arrowhead I was about to say Sunday afternoon, on Sunday evening, boy, you'd think it's Joey Porter, right? 3 strikes and you're out.
You would think. Let's get to some of the news around the league. Sean McVay just had his first press conference, 30-year-old head coach. What are people in the NFL saying about the youth of the Rams' new head man?
Yeah, look, he's been someone I've been hearing quite a bit of rumbling and chatter about really for 4 years, since he started working with Washington's tight ends, before he even, took over sort of the play-calling duties of that offense and had these back-to-back monster prolific seasons with Kirk Cousins as his offensive coordinator. I started hearing about him as a position coach. He has tremendous bloodlines. Obviously, his grandfather was, along with Bill Walsh, one of the architects of that 49ers dynasty. He's someone who incredibly accomplished coaches like John Gruden gravitated to at an early age. He has ties to those guys. Teams like the Rams who are reaching out to Gruden, and they did reach out to Gruden to try to see what it would take to get him to come back. He rebuffed them, but he's also a guy who would say, if you're looking for me, the me as a 30-year-old, like that version of me, he's in Washington. Like he's in Washington helping my brother run that offense. You should probably talk to him. Look, it's going to be a learning curve. he's got to be a leader of men. He's got to speak to all sides of the ball. The Rams are an incredibly young team. I think they only have one person on their roster, a couple of guys who are older than him in terms of starters. So I guess that bodes well for him. I like Wade Phillips as the defensive coordinator for sure, and he's got a 5-year deal. And I think this is more set up for he needs 2 years, year and a half, whatever, to figure out what Goff is. And then if he's not the guy and they don't have a robust offense built around him by the time they move to that Taj Mahal in Inglewood, well, then McVay's going to have a real strong voice in determining who that quarterback for week 1 of 2019 is, because that's really when this thing, from a financial standpoint, has to start taking off for not just Stan Kroenke, but for the entire NFL that's now doubled down on this L.A. gamble.
All right, let's get to the other part of the L.A. gamble. The Chargers have moved. What are others in the NFL saying about the Chargers move?
I mean, in ownership circles, this was viewed as the ultimate eventuality, inevitability. There was, from a fiscal standpoint, now, I'm not saying this like from an ethical standpoint, from a moral standpoint, from an egalitarian standpoint, but this is a league where follow the money rules. From a financial standpoint, given the lack of anything he could bank on in San Diego, it would have been an absolute stunner to end all stunners if Spanos had done anything other than move to L.A. And there was a lot being written and sort of talked about, well, he'll never leave San Diego, and he'll never be somebody else's tenant, and he's just too sentimental to leave. And I'm just like, what planet am I living on? Like, the Cleveland Browns left. The Baltimore Colts left. You know what I mean? The Houston Oilers left. And some of those
St. Louis Cardinals left.
St. Louis Cardinals. And like, you talk about Baltimore and Cleveland. Like, you can't tell the tale of the NFL. Like, you can't talk about the league and the Super Bowl era without going back to some of those teams, and certainly a 1958 championship game. Like, they left in the middle of a night in moving vans covertly. This thing's been coming for 2 years. Like, they were moving to L.A. unless somebody built them a stadium in San Diego. Like, it's kind of as simple as that.
I would agree. And the only thing you have if you have leverage, there's no leverage if you're not willing to use it, right?
Well, and this was the point. Like, they waited to get this on a ballot, the stadium referendum, in a year where, especially in California, they were expecting the highest voter turnout ever. This was obviously the most contentious presidential election anybody can remember. So they thought the more numbers, the better shot we have. They pumped millions of dollars into it, and they hoped to get they needed 66% of the vote to get the downtown stadium. They hoped to get close to 50, which would give them a reason to persevere. They barely got 40%. So even their own muted expectations, they fell way short of. Now, I'm not saying San Diego should or shouldn't do anything. Like, people who don't want to subsidize billionaires, I get that 9,000,000%. But when you talk about NFL calculus and NFL Econ 101, this is the worst-kept secret in the history of the world. I wrote in week 1, barring some miracle falling out of the sky, like bags of money falling out of the sky, or the league giving Spanos some sort of handout to stay, he was going.
Yeah, I tweeted out earlier today. It's funny. We don't like building stadiums for billionaires, but like Tesla got $1.25 billion in tax incentives to build their new factory outside of Las Vegas in Nevada. Like that, this is the way that business is conducted. And if Vegas wouldn't do it, somebody else would have, and they would have built it somewhere else. That's just sorry.
Yeah. That's capitalism. That's the way that's our economic system.
Jason La Canfora joining us in the Doug Gottlieb Show on CBS Sports Radio. Why aren't any of the coordinators who are working this weekend getting a job?
Well, they can't yet, because you can't hire them until they either lose or until they, eventually go all the way to the Super Bowl and win or lose that game. So, even the last time we were sort of in this situation was Seattle in the Super Bowl 2 years ago with Dan Quinn. And they continued to interview. Atlanta did at the time, had an opening, and they continued to interview right up through the divisional round of the playoffs. And then as we got close to the championship game, it became clear that they were going to wait for Dan Quinn and just ride that out through the Super Bowl. San Francisco very well may do the same. I've heard consistently, not just this offseason, but for years, that their owner, Jed York, thinks very highly of Josh McDaniels and very much believe that he had a lot of football savant in him, and that the second time around he would be better and wiser for it. And now it's just a question of, it's really, it's either Josh McDaniels or Kyle Shanahan, or I don't really know who. Now, I don't think New England's losing this weekend. Maybe Atlanta does, but either way, I would not be surprised if the 49ers went ahead, kept going on with their GM search, but did not hire a head coach until after the Super Bowl if Josh McDaniels is still coaching into the Super Bowl.
If you were a betting man, where would you place money that Tony Romo plays next year?
Plays anywhere? Like plays football?
Yeah, where does he play?
Okay. So you're saying, okay, so not just does he play, but where?
No, he'll play.
Right. I was going to say, yeah. Give me that bet all day long. I mean, I think you have to look at Denver for sure. I think you have to look at the Jets. I think there'll be teams like Cleveland that would be interested, but I don't see him having any desire to go there, and he will be able to control the process at least somewhat. And I also don't think Jerry Jones is going to send him somewhere to watch him get killed, and to have his career end that way. I mean, Jerry likes him and respects him too much. All things being equal, they'd like to move him over to the AFC, if so. I mean, I could see John Elway exploring something like that, given that window with his defense isn't going to extend forever.
More likely to happen, Tony Romo play this weekend or the Texans win on the road this weekend?
Oh, Tony Romo play, because maybe that becomes a blowout one way or somebody gets hurt. The Texans aren't winning that game. I mean, not unless, Brady turns it over 5 times.
Well, no, they beat him with Jacoby Brissett this year. They're not losing with Tom Brady at quarterback, correct?
I don't believe so. This is when the Texans' seasons go to die, when they have to step up and play big boy teams in games that matter. That's usually when they get punched in the face.